El Chapo. El Chapo had just pulled off the most embarrassing escape in Mexican prison history. A tunnel over a mile long, with lighting, ventilation, and a motorcycle on rails built under his cell. It was his second prison escape. The DEA was furious. The Mexican government was humiliated. Interpol had him on their most wanted list. Then he decided he wanted to be in a movie. El Chapo contacted Mexican actress Kate Del Castillo through intermediaries. Del Castillo brought in actor Sean Penn for a Rolling Stone interview. What followed was months of encrypted messages, satellite phone signals, and moving intermediaries, all of it traceable. Intelligence agencies had been unable to find him for months. The movie project gave them the thread they needed. On January 8, 2016, Mexican Marines raided a house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. El Chapo tried to escape through the sewers. He was captured. Sean Penn's article ran in Rolling Stone 6 days later. He had survived decades of cartel wars and 2 prison sentences. He was brought down by Vanity. The movie was never made. Pablo Escobar's biggest mistake wasn't a phone call. It was a decision he made years before the phone call. At his peak, Escobar controlled roughly 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. He had politicians, judges, and police on his payroll. He had an army of hired killers numbering in the thousands. Forbes listed him among the wealthiest people in the world. Then he declared war on everyone. Politicians who refused him were assassinated. Judges who ruled against him were killed. In 1989, he ordered the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing all 107 people on board, trying to assassinate a presidential candidate who wasn't even on the plane. Every person he killed left behind family, friends, and allies who wanted revenge. In 1993, a group called Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, emerged. Former allies he had betrayed, rival cartel members, people who had lost family to his violence. They began dismantling his network and sharing intelligence directly with Colombian authorities and the DEA. By late 1993, his organization had collapsed. His associates were dead or arrested. The politicians and police he had once controlled were now hunting him. He was alone, moving between safe houses, trusting almost no one. On December 2, 1993, hiding in a modest house in Medellin, he made a phone call to his son. Colombian intelligence triangulated the signal. The next day, police raided the house. Escobar was shot and killed. The call lasted just over 2 minutes, but the call wasn't the mistake. By the time he made it, he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. Griselda Blanco. Griselda Blanco ran one of the most violent cocaine operations in American history out of Miami in the 1970s and 1980s. Investigators estimate she ordered over 200 murders. She was known as the godmother of cocaine. In 1975, a federal indictment was filed against her. Blanco fled to Colombia before she could be arrested. For years, she moved between Colombia and the United States, changing identities, using false documents, staying one step ahead of investigators who knew exactly who she was but couldn't find her. Her mistake wasn't a single moment. It was the trail she left behind. Every person she threatened, betrayed, or left alive spent years talking to the DEA. Informants inside her own organization fed investigators information continuously. By the early 1980s, the case against her was already built. They just needed to find her. In February 1985, agents arrested her at her home in Irvine, California. She gave a false name and was carrying fake ID papers. It didn't matter. They knew exactly who she was. She had spent 10 years hiding. The people she thought were loyal had spent 10 years talking. George Young. George Young wasn't a cartel boss, but in the 1970s, he was responsible for an estimated 85% of the cocaine entering the United States, working directly with the Medellin cartel as their primary American distributor. His mistake was trusting the wrong person. Young had introduced his partner Carlos Lehder to the Medellin cartel and built the infrastructure to move cocaine into the U.S. at a scale never seen before. But his real downfall came through a close friend named Richard Barril, someone Young had trusted completely. Barril was arrested by the DEA. Facing serious charges, he made a decision. He became an informant and gave investigators everything: locations, contacts, methods, evidence. In 1994, Young was arrested for the last time. He received 60 years in federal prison, later reduced, and was released in 2014. Young later said his worst mistake wasn't getting into drug trafficking. It was believing that loyalty in that world meant the same thing it meant everywhere else. It doesn't. Carlos Lehder, Carlos Lehder was one of the co-founders of the Medellin cartel. He controlled a private island in the Bahamas used as a refueling point for cocaine flights into the United States. He was responsible for moving hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cocaine annually. His mistake was that he wanted everyone to know it. Lehder gave interviews to journalists. He appeared in public constantly. He promoted a bizarre political ideology, mixing neo-Nazism and anti-American nationalism, and founded his own political party in Colombia. He modeled himself after rock stars. He seemed to genuinely believe that being famous made him untouchable. It made him a target. Every public appearance, every interview, every movement was documented by US and Colombian authorities. In 1987, Colombian police arrested him at a farm in Colombia. He was extradited to the United States, the first major Colombian drug lord to be extradited, and sentenced to life in prison plus 135 years. Most drug lords try to be invisible. Lehder tried to be a celebrity. The difference cost him everything. Amado Carrillo Fuentes. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was known as the Lord of the Skies. At his peak in the mid-1990s, he controlled the Juarez cartel and was considered the most powerful drug trafficker in the world, worth an estimated $25 billion. The DEA had been after him for years and couldn't catch him, so he decided to change his face. In July 1997, Carrillo Fuentes checked into a private clinic in Mexico City under a false identity for a complete facial reconstruction combined with liposuction to alter his body shape entirely. He never woke up. He died on the operating table from complications with the anesthesia. He was 41 years old. The two surgeons who performed the operation were found months later, their bodies encased in concrete inside metal drums, dumped on a highway outside Mexico City. The most powerful drug trafficker in the world was killed not by a rival, not by law enforcement, but by his own attempt to disappear. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, El Padrino, the Godfather, was the most powerful drug lord Mexico had ever produced. He founded the Guadalajara cartel, built the first major alliance between Mexican and Colombian traffickers, and at his peak was moving an estimated 4 tons of cocaine into the United States every month. The DEA called him one of the most significant and sophisticated traffickers in the world. For years, they couldn't touch him, not because they didn't know who he was, because he was protected. Felix Gallardo had spent years cultivating relationships with Mexican politicians, governors, police commanders, and government officials at every level. He didn't just bribe them, he made himself useful to them. That network of protection made him virtually untouchable. When his cartel partners Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo were arrested in 1985 after the murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena, Felix Gallardo stayed free. His connections held. His mistake was believing they always would. In 1989, Mexico's new president Carlos Salinas came to power with pressure from Washington to clean up drug corruption. The political calculation changed. The officials who had protected Felix Gallardo for years decided he was no longer worth protecting. On April 8, 1989, federal agents raided his home in Guadalajara. They found him sitting in his living room, still in his bathrobe. He tried to bribe the commander leading the raid, the same commander he had bribed 4 years earlier. This time, the commander told him he was of no use to Mexico City anymore. He was arrested without a single shot fired. The entire system he had spent years building to keep himself safe was the same system that handed him over the moment it stopped being convenient to protect him. He had confused political protection with loyalty. They are not the same thing. El Mencho Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, is the founder of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, currently considered by U.S. authorities to be the most powerful and dangerous drug trafficking organization in the world. The DEA has a $10 million reward for information leading to his capture. El Mencho himself has been extremely careful. He rarely appears in photographs. He avoids traceable communication patterns. He is still at large, but the people around him aren't as careful. Cartel members posted photographs online celebrating their activities, photographs with location metadata embedded in the image files. Others used messaging apps they believed were secure, but had been compromised by law enforcement. Each piece of digital carelessness gave investigators another piece of the network. El Mencho hasn't been caught, but the map around him is being built one social media post at a time. In the digital age, you don't have to make a mistake yourself. You just have to be surrounded by people who do. El Azul Juan José Esparragosa Moreno, El Azul, was one of the most senior figures in the Sinaloa cartel. He had been active in Mexican drug trafficking since the 1970s and survived decades of cartel wars and government operations. His secret was simple. He was completely invisible. No public profile, no interviews, no unnecessary exposure. In 2012, he attended a wedding in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Someone took photographs. One of those photographs made it online. Intelligence analysts identified El Azul in the image, his face, his location, his associates all captured in a single photo posted by someone who didn't think twice about sharing it. The photograph confirmed he was still alive and still active. It gave investigators a current image and a network of associates to work from. A man who had spent decades making himself invisible was found because someone at a wedding posted a photo. In the cartel world, your security is only as strong as the least careful person around you. Frank Lucas. Frank Lucas ran the most sophisticated heroin operation in American history out of Harlem in the late 1960s and early 1970s. He cut out the Italian mafia entirely, sourced his product directly from Southeast Asia, and sold it under the brand name Blue Magic, twice the purity of anything else on the street at half the price. At his peak, he was making an estimated $1 million a day. His mistake was a fur coat. In 1971, Lucas attended the heavyweight championship fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, one of the most publicized sporting events in history, wearing a $100,000 full-length chinchilla fur coat and a matching hat worth $25,000. He had better seats than Diana Ross and Frank Sinatra. DEA agents in attendance noticed. They had heard of Blue Magic, but had no idea who was behind it. After that night, they did. A dedicated task force was assembled. 4 years later, in January 1975, agents raided his home in Teaneck, New Jersey, and recovered $584,000 in cash. During interrogations, his own nephew broke and gave investigators everything: names, locations, and phone numbers used for deals. Lucas was convicted and sentenced to 70 years in prison. He later said it himself. He walked into that fight an unknown and left it a marked man. Nicky Barnes. Nicky Barnes ran Harlem's heroin trade alongside Frank Lucas in the 1970s and considered himself untouchable. He called himself Mr. Untouchable. Openly, he gave interviews. He appeared on the cover of the New York Times magazine in 1977 under the headline, Mr. Untouchable. That article caught the personal attention of President Jimmy Carter, who ordered the DEA to make Barnes a priority target. Barnes was arrested in 1978 and sentenced to life in prison without parole. After years behind bars, watching his former partners spend his money and run his organization, he made a decision. He became a government informant and provided testimony that led to the conviction of his entire inner circle, including members of his own council who had been sleeping with his wife while he was in prison. His cooperation reduced his sentence. He was released in 1998 under the Witness Protection Program. He had called himself Mr. Untouchable. He became the most consequential informant in the history of the New York drug trade. The cover of the New York Times magazine cost him everything. Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega was the military dictator of Panama throughout the 1980s and one of the most valuable intelligence assets the CIA had in Latin America. He provided information on Colombian drug traffickers, allowed U.S. military operations on Panamanian soil, and maintained a relationship with American intelligence agencies that gave him years of protection. He was also running drugs through Panama on a massive scale. His mistake was believing the protection would last forever. By the late 1980s, Noriega had become more of a liability than an asset. 2 federal grand juries in Florida indicted him on drug trafficking charges in 1988. The relationship with Washington collapsed entirely. In December 1989, the United States launched Operation Just Cause, a full military invasion of Panama with 27,000 troops. A primary objective was capturing Noriega. Noriega sought asylum in the Vatican's diplomatic mission in Panama City. He surrendered to U.S. forces on January 3, 1990, after American forces blasted rock music outside the building for days. He was flown to Miami, tried, convicted of drug trafficking and racketeering, and sentenced to 40 years in prison. He had confused being useful to the United States with being protected by it. The moment he stopped being useful, he became a target. Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. After his brother Amado died on the operating table in 1997, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes took over the Juarez cartel. Vicente had watched his brother die trying to change his face to avoid capture. He chose a different strategy. Stay low, stay quiet, avoid confrontation. It worked for years. But Vicente made the same mistake that destroys most cartel leaders eventually. He trusted family over competence. He promoted relatives into key positions regardless of their ability, creating a leadership structure built on loyalty rather than skill. When the Sinaloa cartel began encroaching on Juarez territory in 2008, the organization was not prepared. The resulting war became one of the bloodiest conflicts in Mexican cartel history, turning Ciudad Juarez into one of the most dangerous cities in the world, with over 10,000 murders between 2008 and 2012. The violence drew unprecedented government attention. In October 2014, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes was arrested by Mexican federal police at a checkpoint in Torreon, not through an elaborate intelligence operation, but through a routine traffic stop. He had survived by staying invisible. His own organization's war made invisibility impossible. El Macho Prieto, Gonzalo Inzunza. Inzunza, known as El Macho Prieto, was the chief enforcer for El Mayo Zambada's faction of the Sinaloa cartel. He was responsible for over 80 documented murders, including at least a dozen police officers, and ran cartel operations across Sonora and Baja California. He was so feared that on one occasion, 2 federal police patrol cars entered his neighborhood on an unrelated arrest. His gunmen stopped the cars and ordered the commander to come personally. When the commander arrived, El Macho Prieto walked up and slapped him across the face. He told him he had no permission to be in his territory. The officers left without their weapons, which Inzunza kept for several days. His downfall came from inside his own organization. In 2008, gunmen under his command killed Edgar Guzman Lopez, the son of El Chapo, apparently by mistake, confusing him with a member of a rival cartel. The killing created an irreparable fracture between Inzunza and El Chapo's faction. According to investigators, El Mayo Zambada eventually withdrew his protection after the killing created too many internal problems. Without the full backing of the cartel's leadership, Inzunza became vulnerable. On December 18, 2013, Mexican Marines raided a property in Puerto Peñasco, Sonora, where Inzunza was staying. In the confrontation that followed, he was killed along with 4 of his men. His gunmen took his body with them as they fled. The most feared enforcer in the Sinaloa cartel was brought down not by the government, but by a mistake his own men made, and the internal consequences that followed. El Chapo Isidro. Not every drug lord is brought down by government intelligence. Some are brought down by the people they work with. Gonzalo Araujo Payan, known as El Chapo Isidro, was one of the most powerful independent traffickers in Sinaloa, operating in the border region between Mexico and the United States. He had survived for years by maintaining a deliberately low profile and keeping his operation tightly controlled. His mistake was the people he trusted inside his own organization. According to investigators, Araujo Payan was located and killed in November 2013 in Sinaloa, following intelligence developed through surveillance of his own network, associates whose communications and movements gave away his location. He had built his survival on keeping a small, tight circle. When that circle was penetrated, there was nowhere left to hide. He was killed before he was ever arrested. In the cartel world, that is often how it ends. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe. And if there's a drug lord you think belongs on this list, leave it in the comments. There are enough mistakes for a part 2.